The Rebel has some breaking news. We have some new government documents surrounding the NDP's farm unionization law, Bill 6. And boy, are these documents ever revealing. They demonstrate a real and utter disconnect and disrespect for rural culture by the NDP. Now, there's a lot of information here, but I'll try my best to break it down for you. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is the timing of Bill 6. We know it was rammed through very fast without any real consultation with farmers last fall. The NDP even invoked closure to shut down debate in the legislature about it. Now, we heard NDP ministers time and time again tell us passing the law before we saw the regulations was the way it had to be. Listen.
Sir, with all due respect, we can't carve exemptions before legislation is passed.
Well, now we know that isn't true, and we have the documents to prove it. Just look at this email from Deputy Minister of Agriculture Jason Cripps. He says the tentative timeline would see the cabinet report brought forward by the end of the summer, an announcement of the government's plan forward on Labor Day, followed by stakeholder consultations in the fall and possible legislation tabled in the spring 2016 sitting of the Legislative Assembly. The NDP didn't plan to cram this bill through without consultation in the fall sitting. It was supposed to be brought forward just now in the spring sitting after a winter of consultations with stakeholders. But do you remember what was happening in the fall of 2015? Massive job losses and a catastrophic budget that promised to plunge Alberta into the largest debt in our history. The NDP bumped this law up and picked an unnecessary and very public fight with farmers instead of dealing with the very real problems of Alberta's financial situation. Maybe the NDP needed a distraction and farmers were just collateral damage. And about those consults being held during inconvenient farming times, calving, seeding, and harvest, well, the NDP were well aware that that would be a problem for farmers. Look at this email from John Brown, Assistant Deputy Minister of Agriculture, from September of last year. Folks, with harvest dragging on and lots of cattle coming to town, we recognize that the timing of this session is less than ideal. So last fall, the Ministry of Agriculture had figured out it was a bad idea to schedule meetings for farmers during farmers' busiest times, but they did it anyways. In fact, we know this continues still. The NDP have scheduled their consultations after legislation meetings during seeding, calving, and again, harvest. Worse still, the NDP has made these meetings mandatory for farmers who want a spot at the negotiating table. If these farmers miss a meeting, they're out. Now, it's clear the NDP just don't want farmers at these meetings. And remember how the NDP had badly flubbed how the Hutterite brethren would be covered in Bill 6, making them an afterthought and offering them an exemption they didn't want? Here.
The Terrian brethren of Alberta refused to be singled out, refused to receive special treatment.
Well, the NDP knew the Hutterites posed a unique challenge in their bad law from the very get-go. The NDP specifically mentioned Hutterites in a memo way back in July of 2015. Look, there are three main types of farming and ranching in Alberta: corporate entities, family farms and ranches, and communal-type operations such as Hutterite colonies. It always seemed to me like the communally farming Hutterites were an afterthought in Bill 6. I thought this was just utterly ignorant of rural Alberta culture. The truth actually is probably worse than that. The NDP knew about the uniqueness of Hutterite colonies and just didn't care. The NDP were counting on the fact that our Hutterite friends are religiously pacifist, and the NDP thought they wouldn't fight back. The NDP were wrong, which is so often the case, right? Hutterites joined the rallies against Bill 6 across the province in a show of support and solidarity with the rest of Alberta's agricultural community. The NDP sorely underestimated what our Hutterite neighbors will do to preserve their way of life. I mean, Hutterites left their European homeland to come here for freedom. And in trying to divide the ag sector, the NDP only brought us closer together. And lastly, after all the rallies and protests forced the NDP to exempt family farms from their bad labor law, the NDP worried about how many of you pesky farmers were escaping their big butterfly net of legislation and regulations. Look at this internal email from December 4th, 2015. It reads, Andre, as we discussed earlier this morning, we put our minds to the question about who was left in after exempting family farms. Uh-oh, you guys, it looks like some of you got away on them. Further down the memo, it reads like this. About 80 to 85% of Alberta's 40,000 farms are individually or family owned. Only 5% of farms generate over $1 million in revenue. What we see here is the NDP bureaucrats getting concerned that because farmers forced amendments to Bill 6, now 80 to 85% of farms have been kept out of the clutches of big government, like that's some sort of bad thing. Now, the statement also recognizes that farmers aren't the wealthy, greedy moguls lefty politicians and activist groups like to paint them as. And the memo goes on to say, egg production is dominated by Hutterite operations, estimated 80%. This could place the remaining 20% at competitive disadvantage. Supply managed sector with fixed prices. So what we see here is the NDP basically admitting that their bad Bill 6 creates a real inequity in the agricultural sector, but they just don't care. They pushed the bill through anyways. Now, Bill 6 was never about protecting farm workers. It couldn't have been. If it were, the NDP would have allowed farmers and ranchers to keep their own comprehensive private insurance instead of forcing them into a broken WCB system that Rachel Notley herself called broken just a few short years ago. Listen.
So we don't have a system of even keeping the WCB accountable to the crappy-ass legislation that we have in this province.
Now, the entire Bill 6 debacle has been about bringing the agricultural sector under the control of the government. Farmers and ranchers are small C conservatives. They're independent. They still pray before the start of a rodeo or the start of a chuck wagon race. They're business people. They honor traditional family values, and they reward and respect hard work. Farmers and ranchers are everything the NDP aren't. For the Rebel.media, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid.
Thanks for watching. Click here to never miss a Rebel update. Want even more of the Rebel? Well, click here to become a premium member.